and welcome back to Bookish Theories! In today's video I would like to talk about Enhypen's outro Cross the Line, focusing on a little breakdown and analysis of both the lyrics and the music video. Now, a couple of days ago, Enhypen surprised us with the release of an animated lyric video for Outro Cross the Line, which is the last song of their debut mini-album, as well as a track that further expands on the ongoing narrative that was introduced back in the trailers. Now, with the release of this video, we can say that the Border Day 1 era has officially come to an end. We saw the boys crossing the border in many different occasions, we saw them dying and being born again as their fantasy literally became reality, and we also met the vampires that got awakened by this transformation. Even if this era is over, however, Enhypen's storyline has just begun, and as a matter of fact, the outro is showing us exactly that. You see, much like the intro, the outro is a song that heavily focuses on the storyline. The lyrics tell us that the boys dance their way across the line and enter the new world as the evening shadows fall and they wait for a new day to come. And right off the bat, this makes sense because the lyrics here pretty much confirm what the promotional photos were foreshadowing all along. Crossing the border implies the beginning of a new day. The dusk is followed by the dawn, and this dawn represents the first day of their new life. And this is exactly what we saw back in Given and Taken and Let Me In, where the glass that contained the boys' reality finally cracked open to allow the two worlds to mix together. This rite of passage, however, also foreshadows that something sketchy is taking place, because in the second verse, Jake tells us that after crossing the line, the boys must survive days like a flipped carnival where up is down and down is up and life is mixed with death. And this is very interesting because these lines not only tell us that by crossing the line, the boys caused reality and fantasy to mix together, but also that these two realities actually got flipped upside down. If one side of the border represented darkness, fantasy, vampires, and the past, the other side symbolized light, reality, the boys, and the present. But since Enhypen are both walking on the line and crossing it, these two worlds are now mixed together and flipped upside down. And this idea is perfectly conveyed in the outro because if you look closely, what we see in the video is the beginning of the experience that actually ended back in the intro. At the beginning, for instance, we see a boy entering the woods while he's being guided by a wolf that is leading the way. Now, even if we can argue that the boy might be Jake, since he's the one narrating this whole thing, I think that a more fitting explanation would be to think of the boy as a representation of Enhypen as a whole. In the intro, the narration told us that the boys greet the sun with the rugged woods at their back. So this is an experience that all of them are actually going through at the same time. But much like a flipped carnival, this experience is portrayed backwards because if in the intro the boys exit the woods and it's dawn, in the outro the boys enter the woods during dusk. As Jake tells us, the evening shadows are falling at this point, but even if the dawn is yet to come, the transformation has already begun because as the boy is crossing the border, we also see him walking on a path that looks like a line. This imagery here basically tells us that even before crossing the line, Enhypen were already walking on it. They were already in between fantasy and reality, and the vampire already existed in some recess of their imagination. But it's only after they go through the woods that these two realities merge together, because in this context, the woods represent a liminal space that divides these two worlds. The forest here symbolizes the unknown and the border that they're crossing between fantasy and reality. But even if this process will eventually lead them to the dawn of a new day, this journey also implies a lot of danger because if you look closely, the wolf that is guiding them on this path is none other than their shadow. Now, if we take a look at the symbolism that is used in the other groups from the Big Hit labels, the shadow here usually represents the most monstrous and primitive side of a person that we repress inside of our unconscious. So in this case, it's not a coincidence that the shadow is guiding them because the wolf here will actually lead them to meet the actual monster that is lingering inside of themselves. What's interesting about this is that in classic literature, the wolf is also one of the animals that vampires are actually able to shapeshift into. So if we consider the vampire as the inner monster that their shadow represents, the wolf is a manifestation of it that is luring them in order for the vampire to come to the surface. Now, this idea is also reinforced in Given and Taken, because in an article that was posted on Weavers, the formation that we saw in the choreography was actually compared to a pack of wolves moving closer, meaning that in this context, the wolf and the vampire are one and the same. The wolf is the shadow that guides them, and the vampire is the shadow that preys on them, but much like what we saw during the Mama performance, this is an encounter that was always meant to be, because in the message that appears at the end of their stage, we actually read that their journey was always meant to lead them to the carnival. As the invitation tells us, this is a celebration where up is down and down is up, where life is mixed with death and order is overthrown. And even if we don't know who sent the message, Outro Cross the Line actually foreshadows the idea that the sender might be none other than themselves. Bear in mind, in the Let Me In teaser, we literally saw two versions of an hyphen interacting through the glass, but now this glass has been broken. The boys cross the line and reach the castle where the carnival is taking place, so when they eventually wake from this dreamless sleep, tomorrow does begin like a dream, because now that the two worlds are mixed together, dream and reality are one and the same. As we saw back in Given and Taken, the boy died for the vampire to come to life, so now the shadow that was hidden behind the mask has finally come to the surface. Now, if we want to dive a bit deeper and consider the video in the context of the Big Hit multiverse, this is an imagery that in the future will possibly connect an hyphen storyline with both BTS and Tomorrow by Together. And this is because if on the one hand we have the shadow preying on them behind the mask of the persona, on the other both the wolf and the styling of the eyes of the vampire are very similar to how the inner monster is represented in Tomorrow by Together. This might imply that even if the stories are set in different realities, their inner journey is connected by the same symbols and imagery. But to know how the story will continue, we'll have to wait and see. In the meantime, however, please keep in mind that this year, Carnival actually falls on February 16th, so even if this era just ended, the chances are that a new one might actually begin very soon. For now, however, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did, please think about liking and subscribing. As always, thank you so much for watching, guys. I'll see you next time. Bye bye!